once thought lost forever Romero film, The Amusement Park, which is now available on Shudder, restored and complete on Shudder. Who else has seen Amusement Park?
Is this?
I saw it.
Is this
seen it yet, but I want to watch it.
The 50-minute director's cut?
I believe the one I saw was 58, but 53. It may have been 53, 58. I don't remember. So it was in the 50s for sure.
You saw an extended version, I guess.
I must have. Here's the thing with that movie. If anything, I think that movie has been really overhyped by a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
I think it's benefited, and unfortunately, has taken some flack because of George Romero's name. You say, "Oh, this is a George Romero movie," but your average George Romero fan automatically gets an idea of what they're going to expect to see, right? And then they watch this, and it's like, wait a minute, because it's a movie made by George Romero, but it's not a George Romero film.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that the way that it was kind of marketed and the way that I saw people on Twitter talking about it was like this lost classic, you know what I mean? This newly found masterpiece. It's George Romero. And like, you're already way overplaying it. Like,
restoration is expensive. They got to get their money back somehow.
I guess like we were talking about it in our group chat on Twitter the other day. And there were a couple people who were like, well, I've not seen it, but I really want to see it. And my response was, lower your expectations. This isn't Martin. This isn't The Crazies. This isn't Not a Living Dead. This is a movie, it's not even a feature-length film that he was commissioned to make by a church that's all about the horrors of growing old, losing control of your body, your mind, your dignity, and becoming, prey for people.
Yeah, well, people forget that the Latent Image, this was like a film he made between like Night of the Living Dead and The Crazy. So it was like, 72, right around the time of There's Always Vanilla. And, the Latent Image was a production company that would be hired out, commissioned to do projects for corporations and other companies. Well, you have like a Lutheran church organization, a Presbyterian church organization, and the Department of Aging in Pittsburgh wanted him to do a PSA. They hired the Latent Image to make a PSA about the horrors of aging and ageism.
Mm-hmm.
How, they're what it's like to be old and forgotten and pushed aside by society and picked on by, taken advantage of and just treated poorly. And the whole point of the film was to, raise awareness for the plight of the elderly, right? And there are Romero-isms in it. And I think it was very successful in what it was, intended to be. It's intended to point out that, hey, just because somebody's 70 years old, it doesn't mean they don't deserve respect or a place in society. And, and then you get the insurance companies picking them apart and taking advantage of them, and all the, you see on TV all the time. You got people selling reverse mortgages and all this other crap still to this day, trying to take advantage of seniors because they have a fixed income.
Yeah.
And everybody's trying to get that last dollar away from them. And then they don't want to give them anything for it because they don't figure they're worth it. What's worse than going to your doctor and having your insurance turn you down for a procedure because they don't think you're viable at your age?
Mm-hmm.
At your age, we don't think this would be a viable procedure. Although it could extend your life by 5 years, they don't think that 5 years of your life is worth the money they would have to put up. I mean, that's what this is about. And I think from that aspect, it could be considered one of the most realistically scary things he's ever done, because the horrors of getting old is something we'll all have to face. And I think the closer you get to that age range, the more realistic and more thought-provoking, something like that is. So for what it is, I thought it was great. But it's not intended to be Martin or Day of the Dead or whatever. It was made for a purpose, and it was funny. I think it was so disturbing that it was shelved because the people that hired him to do it were afraid to show it to people because it was too effective.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's a little psychedelic too.
Oh yeah.
Well,
they
it's
probably
72. I mean,
which they
people
probably
were
weren't
still they had an LSD hangover going on. They couldn't help it.
I think you can still justify it as a horror film. The hype is what I think really kills this one, because I know of several people who thought, oh, it's George Romero and it's going to be Dawn of the Dead. It's definitely not that. But Lincoln Maisel, I mean, in terms of acting, it doesn't get much better. I mean, in 50 minutes, he puts you through the emotional ringer. And I mean, the disturbing thing about this film is nothing much has changed in the last half century. I mean, this is still very much relevant to now. It's one of those movies you're not going to feel good after watching it. It does what it's supposed to do. I mean, it's a very sad, depressing piece with not a whole lot of hope the way they shoot this, and I'm sure I wish I could have been a fly on the wall when the Lutheran Church representatives popped this in, and like you've got Death with a scythe in the background looming over the elderly. I mean, it's like, wow, okay, this is a little too much, George. But
how is this film discovered? I mean, I've never heard Romero mention this film as something he had done. I mean, did his wife just kind of like go through his stuff and find it? Or
I mean, I think it was just a gig. It was a paid gig by Romero, and I mean, I think he, it wasn't like something he was going to list on his filmography. It was a gig, like the industrial films that he made there, or like the commercials. It was just a commissioned gig, and
It was a PSA. That's all it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, his wife Suzanne kind of started to press him on it a little bit towards the end of his life. And if you watch it, and I think you have to watch the post panel now on YouTube. I'm not 100% on that. If you can still watch it on Shudder, they kind of go over all of that. Daniel Krauss, who helped finish his last novel, The Living Dead, is on there. Tanana Reeve who you've probably seen on other Shudder stuff. It kind of goes over the whole thing. I am very glad that this was discovered. It's probably something that would fit more as an extra for a lot of people, I think, on a Blu-ray.
Yeah.
It's I wouldn't go in expecting again clear horror from your mind, although again I would argue that this qualifies. It's very surreal and disturbing in a way that you certainly would not expect to get from a film commissioned by a church of all things.
Yeah, I agree. Although some of those churches, it's all about scaring you straight to heaven. You know what I mean?
and
The Lutherans are a little more relaxed than that. But anyway, it does have all the Romero. I think of all the political commentary that Romero has put into his other films. Now, this film to me was like all of that condensed without the trappings.
Yeah.
Like you take away the zombies, or you take away the vampires, or you take away the crazy people, and you just make a condensed 50-minute movie about, socio-political issues. So it's 100%. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's a film by Romero, but I wouldn't, if you tell somebody it's a Romero film, then they're going to get a different idea. But
right.
Yeah, this was what he used to pay the bills in between other films. Because this was his business, and without this, there may have not been the Crazies.
They probably should have done the panel before the premiere and just kind of talked about, this is what this is, and this is what it, was meant to be, and it's definitely. I mean, I'm glad that it's out there. I enjoyed it, but if you're walking into that thing expecting a George Romero, a Romero film, you're probably gonna be like, what the hell is this? You know what I mean?
I think the diehard fans of George, though, it'll be fun to check this out, because to me, Romero is a great filmmaker. I don't just view him as, he's known as the zombie guy, but I think he's just a great mind and somebody that should be celebrated. I enjoyed seeing something a little bit different from him. Had things gone a different way, who knows? He could have been, the next Martin Scorsese or something. I really do think he had a special mind and talent as a filmmaker. So I'm happy to have Amusement Park that I finally got to see it, because it's proof. Like, he could probably do anything.
Is it better than Bruiser? That's all I want to know.
It's better than Bruiser.
Okay, good.
I don't agree.
I don't know. I like Bruiser.
I like Bruiser.
I enjoyed Bruiser a lot when I watched it the last time.
Yeah, agreed.
That one needs a Blu-ray. I think.
But it's
Damn.
not meant to compete with Bruiser or any of his
No,
other
I'm
feature
not
films. It's just a gig for money. It was I guess they restored it from a 16 millimeter print that were pretty damaged. It was 2 prints. One had the audio track, so they could only save the audio from one print. And then they had to he was famous for shooting lots and lots and lots of B-roll. So they were able to cover it pretty well, to piece it back together and then scan it 4K. And I guess it was quite an ordeal to restore this, which I don't blame them for hyping it up to try to get their money back.
Mhm.
But people could feel duped very easily going into this. But if you're paying for Shudder anyway and you're watching it on Shudder, I don't really understand why there would be that much outrage. I mean, it's only 50 some minutes long, and it's a piece of history from a filmmaker that's no longer with us. So at this point, I'd watch TV commercials that he made just to see if I could see his visual style in them. I've seen all his movies. He's not going to make any more. So now that we have to go back to this other stuff, I want to see other things he did with the latent image, just to see how he, put his style into other things that he did for money. I mean, to me, that's interesting.
On the Criterion Carnival of Souls, they have Herc Harvey, the director. They have like an hour and a half of industrials that he made. I mean, that was a way a lot of these filmmakers made their money in between not making a film for 3 or 4 years.
And the studios, George tried. I mean, he made Monkey Shines, and he did the Dark Half. He really, really tried to fit in to the but he was just one of those guys that didn't want to compromise his integrity for dollars. Mm-hmm. And they kept wanting to cut it down and change it and rewrite it. And he spent the entire 90s just trying to get a project off the ground. And Land of the Dead was the other half of Day of the Dead, because he had to cut that part out because he refused to edit. They're like, well, this is going to be X-rated. We need you to cut this down to R, or we can't give you the budget. He's like, well, I'm not going to do that. So he had to make a movie with half the budget. So Land of the Dead was the leftovers of stuff he had to cut out just to be able to get Day of the Dead made. So no matter what you think of Land of the Dead, I kind of put those two together as what the full project would have been had he been allowed to do it.
The irony of that, of course, is that he spent 10 years trying to make, well, at the time they called it Dead Reckoning, to try to get that off the ground. Nobody would give him a chance. And then Resident Evil took off, made a lot of money. And then they came to him and they said, oh, would you like to make a zombie movie?
Yeah.
Well, he was in talks to direct the first Resident Evil movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He
But,
wrote a script for it.
It's out there. Yeah, I think
script
you
is
can
out
read
there.
it. Yeah.
But, it's like the guy who basically fathered the popular version of the zombie genre, that you tell him, no, you're not going to direct this movie. I was saying, and then what we got instead was like, how could you think that would be better than what Romero would give you?
I think if they had said Resident Evil, a George Romero film, I think it would have probably done very well at that time.
Well, but I mean, you're talking about George Romero, Paul W.S. Anderson. I mean, you're talking about two heavyweights. You know what I mean? Two legends in the genre.
The only criticism I remember was that Romero's script was better, but it was like more of a straight horror film, and it lacked maybe some of the action that they wanted from a Resident Evil film. That was the excuse that I heard back then. I wish I should go back and read it again. I'd be curious to kind of compare.
From what I heard, like whatever the company that released, was it Capcom or Konami or something like that?
Capcom.
They thought the script was trash. Trash. They hated it.
Yeah, and what we got was just so much better. I fully understand what they were thinking now. So I understood when Romero, after Land of the Dead, where he still had to compromise, he went back indie, and even though you could say, what about Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead? I mean, at that point, he just gave no shits anymore, and he was just like, let's grab some cameras and go do what we used to do. And whatever happens, happens. And I think Diary worked. I actually like Diary of the Dead. I think that's a pretty good representation of where society was going with the cameras and the narcissism and always wanting to record everything. Survival, not so much, but it was Romero, and I understood from following his career, the beating he took from the studio. So I was able to support no matter what he did, regardless of what the quality was, because ultimately it wasn't all his fault.
I want to say two things real quick. I want to say, Nico, thank you for the $5 super chat, man. You're awesome. Thank you much. And one other thing I want to say really quick is someday you'll be old too.
You'll end up in a white room and you'll never want to go outside again because there's nothing there. There's nothing out there.
So is Amusement Park better than Survival of the Dead?
Yes.
They're not. One's a PSA and one's a film. I mean, Survival of the Dead is definitely my least favorite Romero film, but
50
I can't
minutes
compare it.
is a long PSA.
Why was the Lutheran Church so concerned with people getting older?
Well, it was a joint effort between the Presbyterians, the Lutherans, and the Council on Aging, the local Pittsburgh government. It was about pointing out the exploitation of the elderly and the disenfranchised way they're treated.
I think Ben Stiller should have played the heavy in that, personally. I think that would have been interesting.
Because there's lots of little nods where there's one con man that ends up being like at every little stand, whether it's the insurance stand or it's the housing swap stand or even the religious stand, where like there's all the, George's little nod at everybody being taken advantage of by shysters that exist in all these different groups, and the elderly are a main target. And and when you're old, you lose your voice and you just become something people walk by without a second thought. Like the lady that kept running downstairs to call the doctor, and the doctor kept blowing her off. Her husband's got Alzheimer's or dementia, and they're living in a rat trap. And I love the interview with the guy that supposedly owned the building. And he's like, well, they pay me $10 a month. I'm supposed to fix it on that. I can't fix this on that. I loved all the little things that Romero, did in his. That to me was just.
It was very Romero in the sense that it was a message movie. There was a message there,
and it was a dark sense of humor behind it. Because you could, and it was very realistic as far as you could vision like that person being a real person. And I think since they didn't use a lot of actual actors, it made it even more realistic. So, I thought it was very effective for what it was supposed to be. Maybe a little too effective for church organizations, but it definitely gets its point across, and you will at some point experience the horrors of getting old. That's inevitable unless you drop dead young, which is a tragedy all its own.
It reminds me of the Dennis Leary stand-up where people were criticizing him smoking. He says, well, the only years I'm losing are my convalescent hospital years, okay?
It's true. That's true.
It's going to take 10 years off your life. Yeah, the last 10.
Subscribe to the Region Free YouTube channel and also check out the Patreon to get exclusive content and become a Regionaire.